again, John Eisenlau with Treanor HL. I can point out, Rick talked about the advantages and disadvantages from a construction standpoint. I might just highlight a few things architecturally that come to mind. Scheme 1, apologies again on the number 2. Scheme 1 probably offers the most flexibility in terms of expansion and modification of the building. And I mean that not only expanding horizontally outside the building, but also inside the building. If you have to move departments around, things like that over time, which we as architects certainly worry about when we lay buildings out, so that you could reorganize your departments over time. So a single-story building, 9 times out of 10, is the most flexible. It doesn't have elevators, this particular building. It doesn't have a high quantity of staircases, things like that. So there's some operational simplicities to this building. When you move to a 2-story building like this, and Rick is absolutely right, typically buildings 2 stories are slightly more cost-effective than 1-story buildings. Why? Because they have less roof, they have less site disturbance, things like that. But you start to introduce elevators and staircases in a building like this too. So just think that there are people going up and down now in the building, where this building, people are largely moving horizontally through the building. Advantages and disadvantages when you're moving people around.
And you have 2 elevators in that one. You can have in this one here.
Oh yeah.
You can have a public and you can have a secure elevator.
Now this one does allow the sheriff to move people on the 1st floor of the building and then take them up to the courts, which is exactly the way you want a courthouse to operate. Where this building, the sheriff has to walk people a distance to the courts. It's done. There are many buildings like this around the country that are built this way. But just think about that as you start to kind of make your decision. People moving horizontally, more steps, people moving vertically, maybe a little more efficiently. And then this is actually pretty extreme in my opinion. You don't typically see a jail and a courthouse 4 stories tall, both of them, when you have roughly 100,000 square foot building. It's just not normally done. And it's done here because you're trying to squeeze it onto your site, which makes complete sense just to look at it as a scenario. But keep in mind, this plan that we're showing you here is actually another floor above this. So again, the Sheriff's Department is going to be moving a fair amount of people up and down in this building. So there'll be more elevators, there'll be more staircases. This building is certainly more complicated because of that. That's the most simple building in terms of just moving horizontally. Okay? And expandability, this one gets pretty tough, as you can imagine, right? Unless you can acquire more property around it. But expandability of this building is definitely a challenge. This doesn't necessarily solve your parking issues the way this building does. I think I mentioned this to all of you before, but this is kind of the ideal way that a justice center should lay out. Your public parking is very defined, almost kind of ceremonial in the front of the building. The court's parking is usually concealed behind the courthouse so people don't look at the judge. It's fenced so no one can approach the cars, and likewise with the Sheriff's Department. They're also concealed behind the building. So architecturally, looking at this building from the public, it could be a fairly handsome single-story building where the staff parking is behind and the public parking is up front. That same scenario could occur here, but you'll notice when you lose the wings, then you see the parking. So we're using the buildings architecturally here to kind of conceal the parking. This is a whole different story over here because there's simply not enough room on this site to accommodate all that parking. So it would have to, quote, absorbed around the property, or there have to be additional property dedicated for parking. Those are just some of the nuances in terms of the architecture of the building that we focus on, and certainly we think about that in terms of the sheriff moving people around the building. You basically want buildings like this to be highly efficient, not traveling long distances. This is a great solution, but in many ways architecturally, this is a far better solution because of the separation of people, right? Sheriff's Department's down there on the 1st floor, all your courts are up here on the 2nd floor. So imagine you come in, the public comes in, they go up the lobby, all the courts are upstairs, they never interface with the Sheriff's Department whatsoever. The sheriff literally brings people up from downstairs in elevators and they go straight to court. It's a highly efficient building, this one. And it turns out to be that's your cheaper version or more cost-effective version.
So I got a question.
Sure.
On the second two-story, you're saying sheriff's department on the first floor, courts on the second? Now, is there any reason why that courts can't be on the first since we're dealing with civilians? Sheriff's department can be on the second since, you know, they're employees anyway.
Expansion.
It could.
Yeah.
You could flip the program. It was just our view of putting the courts upstairs, but you could put the courts downstairs and put the sheriff
For the
on
most
top
part,
of
the
it.
public's on the first floor, less elevator usage,
You could
you know,
look at
there's
it
a
that
whole
way.
lot of
Correct.
safety concerns for public.
So that way the sheriff would be moving people horizontally right into courts rather than my previous explanation, come down the hallway, go up into the courts. You're right. And we would probably model that with you to see which one may be more attractive than the other, or one may be more efficient than the other two.
But if you ever had to expand your jail, with it being on the second floor, that would be a lot more restrictive, correct?
No, the jail is
The
the
jail's sitting
second
on the
building.
ground.
I mean, on the,
You would bring,
Other way.
you would bring the inmates like on the ground floor kind of in, and then you would put them on a secure elevator and bring them up to.
yeah, but if we put the jail on the second floor, if you ever had needed to expand that jail,
It wouldn't be the jail, it would just be the sheriff admin on the second floor. All the jail services would be on the first floor.
okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't put your booking and intake, those are always on the first floor of the building. Your booking, intake, medical, is typically your medical, you've got to get people into the medical unit relatively quickly. You don't want them getting in elevators as much as possible.
Gotcha.
But that's a great observation. It is possible that you kind of flip-flop the program if, again,
Might need to
these
stay on an
are,
elevator.
these are more sort of hardline diagrams, for lack of a better term. They're not, we haven't heavily programmed the building with the sheriff, but we know from experience the building's going to be roughly this size. Could be more efficient, maybe not. It's hard to say, but that's why we go to the extent to really kind of flush it out, as you can see in this drawing, that solidifies some of the program.
On 3, the jail versus the new courthouse, do you have a separated cost for those? Like phase 1's gonna be this, and then the new courtroom's be phase 2, and that'll be that much?
I got some breakout, but, I mean, but I dealt with the GCs and GRs, but I would say probably this court side of it is gonna be somewhere around 16 million.
This is a good illustration of how it would look on the site too. Remember, this is the Board of Ed building. It is possible to have these two buildings roughly the same height as the Board of Ed building. And of course,
The scenarios over there, isn't there a drive around the jail?
oh, absolutely, yes.
So how do you get a drive around that jail?
This one here or that one there?
This one.
You sit down with the fire department and the state fire marshal and make sure that we understand it correctly. Yeah, there's gonna have to be some give and take on how you get around this building. But it's usually, we typically sit with the fire department and talk to them about that, to see how they're gonna fight the fire around this building.
You're never gonna get around this back
No.
corner.
No,
No.
no. And they typically can do that sometimes, but it requires a certain size truck. And there's some nuances to fighting the fire around a building like this. Another good point. But that would certainly be something that would need to be discussed right away.
Yes, sir.
Any shells placed in this?
None.
None.
No, and you're right, 'cause remember we talked before about we can build it for 190 with shell space to get you to 225. I mean, after some of the last meetings, we kind of got rid of the shell space because money seemed to be a big part of the problem. So we just went for, if it's a 190 bed jail, it's built for 190. And then anything that we add to it would be,
You could do future
Yeah, you
housing.
do future housing. you know,
What is the size of the property for these?
This is approximately 15 acres. And it's possible that it could be slightly smaller, but that's pretty close to the ideal size. And that pretty much trues up from justice facilities of this size. 15 acres is a nice number, because you can see, once you consider the fire lane, and then you certainly don't want the fence right on the fire lane typically, so Could you carve an acre or two out of this? Maybe, but that's usually the sweet spot, around 15 acres. And we use the same amount here. You could certainly use this site in other ways, or put other facilities on this site too. Typically, we see a juvenile facility maybe built on a campus like this, but it gives you a lot of other opportunities. And that's 200 parking spaces, which is about right for a building of this size. But 15 is a good number. Great question. It's not 7 acres. And it's not, you can see when you really kind of factor in exactly how that site lays out. That's why it's so important to understand the site circulation, as we call it.
One thing that, it came up on another meeting that John or I were in on another project, but I just thought it's relevant here a little bit, but so let's just say that we're looking at scenario 2, and what was scenario 2, 63 and some change, 63 million. If the job gets pushed a year, add about 3.2 million. So on the other job that we were talking about, every year that it pushes is 14 million. So that's stuck in my head on that other project. So I just ran the number on this one really quick. So not trying to push anybody into make a decision fast, but every year, like 3 to 5%, everything just kind of, labor and material just rises. So
Yeah, it's actually scary how much the numbers are still increasing. And we've got some examples of that here. Sullivan County waited during the pandemic, as they should have. There was a lot of things that were moving targets at the time, and the building was no cheaper at the end of the day. I'm not seeing that anywhere, first one. I'm sure
what's that?
Price decline on projects. It's not happening.
There's ebbs and flows, but as it's going up, it'll dip down a little bit, and it keeps on going up. So you'll see little things in steel will come down, but then other things are up. It's on that slow increase, 5% every year. Questions?
Which one of the buildings between scenario 1 and 2 would be easier to maintain? Does the air conditioners go on top of all the buildings, or?
You want my architect's opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably that one.
Scenario 1.
This has a lot of exterior wall on the building, so you have a lot of heat loss to the exterior of the building. This also has a lot of roof. Typically get heat loss to the roof. The sustainable design people, or my people, if they ran numbers on this, would tell you this is probably a much more efficient building to run from a heating, cooling, and maintenance standpoint. It's just it's more compact. It's probably the superior scheme of the three in my estimation.
And ironically, it's the cheapest.
Yeah, and it's probably easier for you, if we could keep the building as simple as this, right, Rick? There is some.
Yeah, from a construction standpoint,
It's a nice, simple rectangle.
that's far easier.
You could have a very nice ceremonial entry to the building. You could make it as,
Monumental as you want.
as monumental as you want, as a civic building, but it's a straightforward rectangular building. Lots of laydown space on that one, Rick. But I would probably say that building is certainly more economical to run from a total cost of building operation.
In regards to personnel, are there any difference between the 3 scenarios?
We had Jim look at that, and I think that answer is,
It's identical. The only difference is if you don't build a criminal justice center, you increase transport officer costs and reduce court holding costs, which is basically a difference of 1. But all three designs are the identical staff costs.
Thank you.
yeah, great questions.
Any more?